The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the general store, and Lillian Larson stepped down onto the dusty main street of Scottsbluff, Nebraska, with trembling legs and a heart full of equal parts hope and dread. It was August 1882, and she was 6 months late to meet the man who had paid for her passage west, the man who had written her letters filled with promises of a new life, the man who surely hated her by now for making him wait so long. The driver handed down her worn carpetbag and the small trunk that contained everything she owned in this world. Lillian smoothed down her gray traveling dress, adjusted her bonnet, and looked around at the town that would be her new home. Scottsbluff sat in the North Platte River Valley, surrounded by bluffs that rose like ancient sentinels against the endless blue sky. The town was small but growing, with wooden buildings lining both sides of the dusty street. She could see a hotel, a saloon, the general store, a livery stable, and beyond them, scattered houses and ranches spreading out toward the horizon. Her hands shook as she picked up her carpetbag. The trunk would have to wait. First, she needed to find Preston Nichols, the rancher who had arranged for her to come west as his bride. The man she had kept waiting for half a year. It was not her fault, she told herself for the 1,000th time. When she had agreed to his proposal through the matrimonial agency in Philadelphia, she had fully intended to leave within the month. But then, her younger sister Martha had fallen ill with scarlet fever, and Lillian could not abandon her. She had written to Preston explaining the situation, but she never received a reply. She wrote again and again, each letter more desperate than the last, but still no response came. She did not know if her letters ever reached him, or if he had simply decided she was not worth waiting for. But Martha had recovered, slowly and painfully, and once she was well enough to stay with their aunt, Lillian had scraped together enough money for the journey west. She had traveled by train and then by stagecoach, spending every penny she had, driven by the hope that Preston Nichols had not completely given up on her. A tall man in a worn cowboy hat was loading supplies onto a wagon in front of the general store. Lillian approached him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, sir. Could you tell me where I might find Preston Nichols?" The man looked up, his weathered face breaking into a friendly smile. "Preston, sure. His ranch is about 5 miles west of town. But you will find him at the lumber mill today. He has been overseeing some work there. Just head down this street and turn left at the church. You cannot miss it." "Thank you kindly," Lillian said, relief flooding through her. At least Preston was still here. At least he had not left Scottsbluff entirely. She made her way through the town, her bag growing heavier with each step. The August heat beat down on her shoulders, and dust coated her already travel-stained dress. She passed women in calico and gingham, cowboys in dusty chaps, and children playing in the street. Everyone seemed to have a purpose, a place they belonged. She was the only one who felt like a ghost, caught between the life she had left behind and the one she hoped to build. The lumber mill sat at the edge of town, the sound of saws cutting through timber filling the air. Lillian paused at the entrance, gathering her courage. She could see several men working, their shirts damp with sweat despite the shade provided by the mill's roof. One man stood apart from the others, discussing something with the foreman. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and dark hair visible beneath his hat. Even from a distance, she could see the authority in his stance, the way the other men deferred to him. Her heart hammered in her chest as she walked toward him. This had to be Preston Nichols. This had to be the man she had promised to marry. She was close enough now that she could see his face. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and a jaw darkened by stubble. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most. As she approached, he turned and his eyes met hers. They were the color of storm clouds, gray and penetrating. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Lillian felt as though she might faint from the tension, from the fear of what he might say, what he might do. She had prepared speeches during the long journey, rehearsed apologies and explanations, but now every word fled from her mind. Preston Nichols. She managed to say, her voice barely audible over the sound of the saws. He took a step toward her, his expression unreadable. "Yes, I am Lillian Larson." She forced herself to meet his eyes, to not look away no matter how much she wanted to. "I know I am late. I know you must be angry. My sister was ill and I could not leave her, and I wrote to you but I never heard back. And I understand if you have changed your mind about everything. But I came anyway because I had nowhere else to go, and I hope that maybe—" "Stop," he said, holding up one hand. His voice was deep and rough like gravel underfoot. He took another step closer, close enough that she could see the lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "You are here now. That is what matters." Lillian stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I do not understand. You are not angry." Preston removed his hat, running one hand through his dark hair. His eyes never left her face, and there was an intensity in his gaze that made her breath catch. "Angry? Miss Larson, I have been worried sick. When you did not arrive, I thought something terrible had happened. I contacted the matrimonial agency, but they had no information. I wrote letters, but I did not know where to send them since you were supposed to be here. Every day for 6 months, I went to town to check if the stagecoach brought any news of you. Every single day." Tears stung Lillian's eyes. "You waited for me. I said I would, did I not?" He gestured toward the foreman. "Let me finish up here and I will take you to the ranch. You must be exhausted from your journey." Lillian nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She had prepared herself for rejection, for anger, for disappointment. She had not prepared herself for this quiet acceptance, this steadfast loyalty from a man who barely knew her. Preston spoke briefly with the foreman, then led her to a wagon hitched nearby. He lifted her trunk and bag into the back with ease, then helped her up onto the seat. His hand was warm and calloused, his grip strong but gentle. Once she was settled, he climbed up beside her and took the reins. They rode in silence for a while, leaving the town behind. The landscape opened up before them, endless grassland dotted with cattle and broken by the occasional stand of cottonwood trees. The bluffs rose in the distance, their sandstone faces glowing golden in the afternoon sun. "Your letters," Preston said suddenly. "The ones you mentioned writing. I never received them." "I suspected as much," Lillian replied. "The postal service can be unreliable, especially from Philadelphia. Tell me about your sister. Is she well now?" The genuine concern in his voice touched her deeply. "Yes, she recovered fully. It took months, but she is strong now. She is staying with our aunt." Preston nodded, his eyes on the road ahead. "You could have sent a telegram." "I tried," Lillian admitted. "But the telegraph office said the lines were down somewhere between Nebraska and Pennsylvania, and by then I was already making arrangements to come. I hoped you would understand." "I do understand," he said quietly. "Family comes first, always." Lillian studied his profile, this man who was supposed to become her husband. He had a strong nose, high cheekbones, and a mouth that looked like it did not smile often. But there was kindness in his eyes, a gentleness that contradicted his rough exterior. "Why did you write to the matrimonial agency?" she asked. "A man like you must have had opportunities to marry locally." Preston was quiet for so long that Lillian thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I wanted someone who chose this life willingly. Most of the women in town have known me since I was a boy. They know about my father, about what happened to my family. I wanted a fresh start with someone who did not already have opinions formed." "What happened to your family?" Lillian asked gently. His jaw tightened. My father lost everything in a bad cattle deal. The shame of it killed him, and my mother died of a broken heart 6 months later. That was 4 years ago. I have been rebuilding the ranch ever since, and I am finally at a point where I can support a wife and family. I am sorry for your loss, Lillian said. My parents died when I was 18, cholera outbreak in Philadelphia. That is why Martha only had me to care for her. Preston glanced at her, and something passed between them, an understanding born of shared grief. We have both known loss then. Yes, Lillian agreed softly. The ranch came into view as they crested a small hill. It was not large, but it was clearly well maintained. A 2-story wooden house stood at the center, with a barn, a stable, and several outbuildings nearby. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see horses in a corral. It was simple and honest, and Lillian felt an unexpected surge of hope. This could be home. This could be the new beginning she had dreamed of. Preston helped her down from the wagon, his hands steady at her waist. It is not much, he said, but it is mine. Ours if you still want to go through with the arrangement. Lillian looked up at the house, then back at him. I want to, she said, but I think we should take some time to get to know each other first. We are strangers, after all. Something that might have been relief crossed his face. I was hoping you would say that. You can have the upstairs bedroom. I have been sleeping in the small room downstairs. We will marry when you are ready, not before. A woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was middle-aged with gray-streaked brown hair and a kind face. Preston, you did not tell me you were bringing company. Mrs. Cooper, this is Lillian Larson, Preston said. My intended bride. Lillian, Mrs. Cooper is my housekeeper. She comes 3 times a week to cook and clean. Mrs. Cooper's face lit up with delight. Oh, my dear, we have all been so worried. Come inside, come inside. You must be exhausted. She took Lillian's arm and practically pulled her toward the house, chattering all the while about how Preston had been beside himself with worry, how he had driven everyone in town crazy checking for news of her arrival. The inside of the house was simple but comfortable. The main floor had a large kitchen, a sitting room with a stone fireplace, and Preston's small bedroom. Upstairs, there were 2 more bedrooms, one of which Mrs. Cooper led her to. This will be your room, dear, she said, bustling about opening windows to air it out. Preston had me prepare it months ago when he first received word that you had accepted his proposal. Fresh linens on the bed, curtains at the windows, everything proper. Lillian looked around the room. It was larger than any bedroom she had ever had in Philadelphia. A quilt in shades of blue and cream covered the bed, matching curtains hung at the windows, and there was even a small desk with a chair by the window, perfect for writing letters. It is lovely, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Mrs. Cooper patted her hand. You rest now, dear. I will bring you up some water for washing, and then we will have supper. Preston usually eats at 6 o'clock sharp. After Mrs. Cooper left, Lillian sat on the edge of the bed and let the tears finally fall. She had been so frightened, so certain that she had ruined everything by arriving late. But Preston had waited for her. Every single day he had gone to town and waited for news of her. That kind of loyalty, that kind of dedication, was more than she had ever dared to hope for. Over the following days, Lillian settled into a routine at the ranch. She woke early, helped Mrs. Cooper with breakfast, and then spent her days learning about ranch life. Preston worked from dawn until dusk, managing the cattle, repairing fences, and overseeing the 2 ranch hands he employed. But he always made time to talk with her at meals, to answer her questions, to help her understand this new world she had entered. Lillian found herself watching him as he worked, admiring the easy competence with which he handled horses, the way he treated his animals and his workers with equal respect. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, people listened. There was an integrity about him that drew her in, made her want to know more. One evening, about a week after her arrival, they sat on the porch after supper, watching the sun set over the bluffs. The air was cooling, bringing relief from the August heat. "Tell me about your life in Philadelphia," Preston said. "What did you do there?" "I worked as a seamstress," Lillian replied. "After our parents died, I had to support Martha and myself. I took in mending and made dresses for ladies when I could get the work. It was hard, but we managed." "Do you miss it?" Lillian considered the question. "I miss Martha terribly, but the city itself? No, it was crowded and dirty and hard. There was never enough work, never enough money. I always felt like I was drowning, like I could never get ahead no matter how hard I tried." "And now?" Preston asked, turning to look at her. "Now I feel like I can breathe," she admitted. "The sky is so big here. Everything is so open. It is different and I have much to learn, but I like it." Preston smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. "I am glad. I was worried you would hate it here, that you would find it too rough, too isolated." "I was more worried you would find me lacking," Lillian confessed. "I am not used to ranch work. I have never even ridden a horse." "We can fix that," Preston said. "Tomorrow I will teach you to ride." True to his word, the next morning Preston brought a gentle mare named Daisy to the corral. Lillian was nervous, but Preston was patient, showing her how to mount, how to hold the reins, how to guide the horse with her legs. His hands were gentle when he corrected her grip, his voice encouraging when she faltered. "You are doing well," he said, walking beside her as she circled the corral. "Daisy likes you." "How can you tell?" Lillian asked, concentrating hard on staying balanced in the saddle. "See how her ears are forward. She is relaxed content. If she was nervous, her ears would be back." Lillian patted the mare's neck, feeling a surge of accomplishment. "I never thought I would be riding a horse." "There are many things you will learn here," Preston said. "But you are a quick study. I can see that already." Over the following weeks, Lillian's confidence grew. She learned to ride well enough to accompany Preston on short trips around the ranch. She learned to recognize the different cattle brands, to spot when an animal was sick or injured, to read the weather signs in the clouds and the behavior of the livestock. She learned to make biscuits the way Preston liked them, to cook on the wood stove without burning things, to preserve vegetables for the coming winter. And as she learned, she grew closer to Preston. She discovered that beneath his quiet exterior was a man of deep feelings and strong convictions. He cared about his land, his animals, and the people who worked for him. He was fair and honest in all his dealings, and he had a dry sense of humor that surprised her into laughter at unexpected moments. One afternoon in September, they rode out together to check on a herd of cattle grazing in the western pasture. The weather had turned cooler, the relentless summer heat giving way to pleasant autumn days. The grasslands had faded from green to gold, and the cottonwood trees were just beginning to show touches of yellow in their leaves. They dismounted near a creek to let the horses drink, and Lillian stood beside Preston, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "Preston," she said, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course. In your letters you mentioned wanting a family, children. Is that still what you want?" He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Yes, I grew up as an only child and I always wished for brothers and sisters." "I want a house full of children," laughed her life, "but only if you want that too." Lillian felt warmth spread through her chest. "I do want that. I always imagined having a large family. I hated that Martha and I were alone after our parents died." Preston reached out and took her hand, the first time he had initiated such contact. His palm was warm and rough against hers. "Lillian, we have been living under the same roof for almost a month now. I know this is not how these arrangements usually work, but I find myself caring for you more than I expected, not just as my intended wife, but as a person, as someone I genuinely admire and respect." Her heart beat faster. "I feel the same way. You have been so kind, so patient with me. You could have been angry about my late arrival, but instead you made me feel welcome. You have taught me so much, and you have never made me feel foolish for not knowing things." "I want to marry you," Preston said, his gray eyes intense. "Not because of the arrangement, not because I need a wife to help run the ranch, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it now. But I will only ask if you truly want this. You are free to say no, and I will help you find a place in town, or pay for your passage back to Philadelphia if that is what you wish." Lillian squeezed his hand, tears gathering in her eyes. "I do not want to go back to Philadelphia. I want to stay here with you. I want to be your wife." Preston's face transformed with a smile so full of joy that it took her breath away. "Then we will be married, whenever you are ready." "I am ready now," Lillian said. "I have been ready for weeks, but I did not want to presume." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. It was the first time he had truly held her, and Lillian leaned into his strength, feeling safe and cherished. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her cheek, could smell the scent of leather and horses and sun-warmed cotton. "We will ride to town tomorrow," Preston murmured into her hair. "We will see the minister and arrange everything." They were married 3 days later in the small church in Scottsbluff, with Mrs. Cooper and the ranch hands as witnesses. Lillian wore a dress of deep blue calico that she had sewn herself, her best work. Preston wore a new suit he had ordered specially from the general store, and when he saw her walking toward him down the aisle, his eyes filled with an emotion so powerful that Lillian felt it like a physical touch. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed her gently, reverently, as though she were something precious and fragile. Lillian kissed him back, pouring all her hope and joy and gratitude into that single moment. The small gathering returned to the ranch for a celebration dinner that Mrs. Cooper had prepared. There was roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden, and a cake that the older woman had stayed up late baking. The ranch hands, Sam and Thomas, were young men in their early 20s who treated Preston with genuine affection and respect. They toasted the newlyweds with glasses of whiskey, their good wishes sincere. As the sun set and their guests departed, Lillian found herself alone with Preston in the house that was now truly their home. She was nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she stood in the kitchen, clearing away the last of the dishes. Preston came up behind her, gently taking the plate from her hands and setting it aside. "Leave those," he said softly. "They can wait until morning." He turned her to face him, his hands warm on her shoulders. "Lillian, I know you must be nervous. I am nervous too, but I promise I will be gentle. We can take this as slowly as you need." She looked up at him, this man who had become so dear to her in such a short time. "I trust you," she whispered. Preston smiled and took her hand, leading her upstairs. The room that had been hers alone for the past month was now theirs together. Someone, probably Mrs. Cooper, had lit candles around the room, creating a warm, golden glow. Fresh flowers sat in a vase on the dresser. That night, Lillian learned what it meant to be truly loved, to be cherished not just in words but in actions. Preston was patient and tender, guiding her through her nervousness with gentle touches and whispered words. When she cried, he kissed away her tears and held her close. When she finally surrendered to the moment, to him, it was with a sense of rightness that filled her entire being. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Preston's arm around her, her head on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, matching her own. "I waited every single day for you," Preston murmured into the darkness, "and you were worth every moment of that wait." Lillian turned her face up to kiss his jaw. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that wait." "I could never regret it," he said, his arms tightening around her. "You are everything I hoped for and more." The autumn passed in a blur of happiness. Lillian took over more of the household duties from Mrs. Cooper, learning to manage the ranch accounts, to plan meals, to preserve food for the winter. She continued to improve her riding skills, and Preston taught her to shoot, saying every ranch wife needed to know how to handle a rifle. In October, they traveled to town for supplies, and Lillian was introduced to more of the community. The women of Scottsbluff welcomed her warmly, inviting her to join their sewing circle and church activities. She made friends with Sarah, the blacksmith's wife, and Emma, who ran the boarding house. They were curious about her journey west, and she found herself telling the story of her delayed arrival and Preston's patient waiting. The women sighed over the romance of it, declaring Preston Nichols one of the finest men in Nebraska. November brought the first snows, light dustings that melted quickly under the sun. Preston and his ranch hands worked to bring the cattle closer to the ranch, to prepare for the harsher weather that would come. Lillian spent her days making warm clothes, knitting socks and scarves, and helping to winterize the house. One evening in late November, as they sat before the fire after supper, Lillian realized she had something important to tell Preston. She had suspected for a few weeks, but now she was certain. "Preston," she said, setting aside her knitting, "I have news." He looked up from the ranch accounts he had been reviewing, his gray eyes attentive. "What is it?" "I am with child." She watched his face carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. "The baby should arrive in early summer." For a moment, Preston simply stared at her, then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen. He crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling her up from her chair and into his arms. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby." Lillian laughed, relief and joy flooding through her. "Yes, we are. Are you happy?" "Happy." Preston set her down carefully, as though she had suddenly become made of glass. "Lillian, I am beyond happy. This is everything I wanted. You and a child, a family of our own." He knelt before her chair, his hands on her still flat stomach. "A son or a daughter, it does not matter which, as long as both of you are healthy." "We will need to prepare," Lillian said practically, though her eyes were bright with tears. "We should turn the spare bedroom upstairs into a nursery, and I will need to sew baby clothes, prepare diapers and blankets." "We will do all of that," Preston assured her. "But first, you need to take care of yourself. No more heavy lifting. I will talk to Mrs. Cooper about coming more often to help with the housework." Lillian rolled her eyes affectionately. "Preston, I am pregnant, not ill. Women have been having babies while running ranches for generations." "Not my wife," he said firmly. "Not when I can make things easier for her." The winter months were hard but joyful. The snow came in earnest in December, and for weeks at a time they were isolated on the ranch, with only the ranch hands for company. But Lillian did not mind. She had Preston, and she had the growing life inside her, and that was enough. They spent the long winter evenings together, reading by firelight, talking about their plans for the future, dreaming about the child who would arrive in the spring. Preston proved to be attentive and protective, sometimes overly so. Lillian had to gently remind him that she was perfectly capable of walking down the stairs without assistance, of cooking a meal without burning down the house. In January, a severe blizzard struck, lasting for 3 days. The wind howled around the house, driving snow against the windows until they could see nothing but white. Preston and the ranch hands worked around the clock to keep the animals fed and protected, coming back to the house exhausted and covered in snow. On the second night of the blizzard, Preston came in so cold that his lips were blue. Lillian made him strip out of his frozen clothes and wrapped him in blankets by the fire, bringing him hot coffee and soup. She sat beside him, rubbing warmth back into his hands. "This is what I feared when I wrote to the matrimonial agency," Preston admitted, his teeth still chattering slightly. "That I would bring a city woman out here and she would hate the hardship, the isolation, the brutal winters." "I do not hate it," Lillian said firmly. "Yes, it is hard. Yes, I worry when you are out in weather like this. But this is our life, Preston. These are the challenges we face together, and I would rather face them with you than live an easy life without you." He pulled her close, careful of her growing belly. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "You did not find me," she reminded him with a smile. "You waited for me. That is even better." By February, the worst of winter had passed, and Lillian's pregnancy was becoming obvious. She had stopped wearing her corset weeks ago, and Preston had commissioned Mrs. Cooper to help her sew looser dresses to accommodate her changing shape. She felt ungainly and awkward, but Preston looked at her as though she were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "You are carrying our child," he told her one night, his hand resting on her rounded belly. "How could you be anything but beautiful?" The baby kicked against his palm, and Preston's face filled with wonder. "I felt that." The baby kicked. "He or she has been very active lately," Lillian said, laughing at his expression. "I think we might have a future cowboy on our hands." March brought the first hints of spring, and with it, preparations for the new baby intensified. Preston transformed the spare bedroom into a nursery, building a cradle from oak wood and sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Lillian sewed tiny gowns and knitted small blankets, her hands moving automatically as she daydreamed about the child who would wear them. In April, her sister Martha arrived from Philadelphia, sent by their aunt to help with the birth. Lillian cried when she stepped off the stagecoach, so happy to see her sister again after nearly a year apart. Martha was 19 now, fully recovered from her illness and blooming with health. "Look at you," Martha exclaimed, hugging Lillian carefully. "You are positively glowing." "And this must be Preston." Preston shook Martha's hand warmly. "Welcome to Nebraska. We are glad you could come." Martha settled into the guest room and quickly made herself useful around the ranch. She and Lillian spent long hours together, catching up on all the months they had been apart. Martha told stories about Philadelphia, about their aunt and the old neighborhood, but she also asked endless questions about ranch life, about Preston, about Lillian's new world. "You are truly happy here," Martha observed one afternoon as they sat on the porch, shelling peas. "I can see it in your eyes." "I am," Lillian confirmed. "Happier than I ever was in Philadelphia. Preston is a good man, Martha. He treats me like I am precious. He makes me feel loved and valued every single day." "I can see that too," Martha said. "The way he looks at you, the way he hovers when you stand up too quickly. He adores you." In early June, on a warm morning when the prairie was green with new grass and wildflowers bloomed in every color, Lillian went into labor. Preston sent Thomas racing to town to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Cooper, while he stayed with Lillian, holding her hand and trying to hide his own fear. The labor lasted through the day and into the evening. Martha and Mrs. Cooper attended her, while the doctor, an older man named Dr. Harrison, supervised everything with calm competence. Preston was banished to the kitchen, where he paced and worried until Sam and Thomas finally convinced him to sit down. As the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson, a baby's cry filled the upstairs bedroom. Preston was on his feet instantly, but Mrs. Cooper appeared at the top of the stairs before he could rush up. "You have a son," she announced, beaming. "A big, healthy boy, and your wife is tired but doing well." Preston took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the bedroom. Lillian lay in the bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. Martha stood beside her, wiping tears from her own eyes. Preston approached slowly, reverently, as though entering a church. He sat on the edge of the bed, looking down at his son for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was already making rooting motions with his tiny mouth. "He is perfect," Preston whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like his mother." "Do you want to hold him?" Lillian asked. Preston nodded, and Lillian carefully transferred the baby into his arms. The infant settled immediately, and Preston cradled him with surprising confidence for a first-time father. A tear rolled down his cheek as he studied his son's tiny features. "What should we name him?" Lillian asked. They had discussed names for months but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Preston said, "James, after my grandfather, James Nichols." "James," Lillian repeated, testing the name. "I like it. James Preston Nichols." Preston looked up at her, his eyes shining. "Thank you," he said. "For him, for everything, for agreeing to come west, for waiting for me to find you, for building this life with me." "I should be thanking you," Lillian said softly. "You waited every single day for me, even when you had no reason to believe I would ever come. You gave me a home, a family, a love I never knew existed. I am the lucky one." Preston leaned over carefully, mindful of the baby between them, and kissed her gently. "We are both lucky, and this is just the beginning." The next weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. James proved to be a hungry baby with powerful lungs. But even when Lillian was exhausted, she found herself staring at him in amazement, unable to believe that she and Preston had created this perfect little person. Preston was a devoted father from the start. He would hold James for hours, talking to him about the ranch, about the horses, about all the things they would do together when he was older. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with the baby when he was fussy, and looked at his son with an expression of such pure love that it made Lillian's heart ache. Martha stayed through the summer, helping with the baby and the housework. She grew close to Preston as well, telling Lillian that she finally understood why her sister had been willing to travel so far to marry a stranger. "He is not a stranger anymore, though, is he?" Martha said. "He is family." In August, exactly a year after Lillian's arrival, they held a small party to celebrate James's christening and their first wedding anniversary. The church in Scottsbluff was full of friends and neighbors, all eager to welcome the newest member of the community. James was baptized by the same minister who had married his parents, and he wailed his displeasure at the cold water while the congregation chuckled affectionately. Afterward, at the ranch, tables were set up outside laden with food. There was dancing and laughter, and as the sun began to set, Preston pulled Lillian aside, away from the crowd. "A year ago today, you arrived on that stagecoach," he said, taking both her hands in his. "6 months late and more beautiful than I had imagined. I was so afraid you would not come, and then I was afraid you would hate it here. But you stayed, and you made this place a home. You gave me a son and a love I never thought I would find." "You waited for me," Lillian said, her eyes bright with tears. "When you had every reason to give up, you waited. That is what I will remember most about our story. Not that I was late, but that you were patient, that you believed in me even when I did not believe in myself." Preston kissed her, long and deep, with all the passion and tenderness of a man deeply in love. When they broke apart, they could hear James starting to fuss in Martha's arms. "Duty calls," Lillian said, laughing. "Let it call," Preston said, pulling her back for one more kiss. The rest of the world can wait. Right now, this moment, you are mine." But of course, they did return to the party, to their son, to their life. And as Lillian settled into a chair with James at her breast, Preston beside her, and Martha chatting with the neighbors, she felt a peace so profound that it seemed to fill her entire being. She had come to Nebraska 6 months late, frightened and uncertain, expecting rejection and finding acceptance instead. She had found a man who valued loyalty and integrity, who worked hard and loved harder. She had found a home in this vast prairie landscape, a community that had welcomed her, and a purpose that went beyond mere survival. Martha left in September, returning to Philadelphia with promises to visit again soon. It was hard to say goodbye, but Lillian knew her sister had her own life to live. They stood on the platform in Scottsbluff, hugging tightly while Preston held a squirming James. "Be happy," Martha whispered. "You deserve this." "I am happy," Lillian assured her. "Happier than I ever thought possible." As the train pulled away, Lillian waved until her sister was out of sight. Then she turned to Preston, who shifted James to one arm and wrapped the other around her shoulders. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "Yes," Lillian said, leaning into his warmth. "Let us go home." The fall harvest was bountiful that year, and Preston sold cattle at a good price. He used some of the profits to expand the house, adding a proper dining room and a larger kitchen. "For all the children we are going to have," he told Lillian with a grin. As winter approached again, Lillian discovered she was pregnant once more. This time she knew what to expect, and though she was tired running after an active toddler while carrying another child, she was also deeply content. Preston hovered even more than he had the first time, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she was resting enough, if she was eating properly. "You do realize women have been having babies while doing ranch work for generations," Lillian reminded him, echoing her words from the first pregnancy. "Not my wife," he replied, just as he had before, and Lillian laughed because some things never changed. Their daughter was born on a cold March morning in 1884, when James was not quite 2 years old. She came into the world screaming her displeasure, her tiny face red with fury. Preston fell in love instantly, cradling his daughter with the same gentle reverence he had shown his son. They named her Rose after Preston's mother, and she had her mother's coloring, light brown hair and hazel eyes. James was fascinated by his baby sister, toddling over constantly to pat her head and say, "Baby, baby," in his high, clear voice. Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Lillian managed the household and cared for the children, while Preston ran the ranch with increasing success. They hired another ranch hand, and Mrs. Cooper came 5 days a week now to help with the cooking and cleaning. The house was always full of life and laughter, of children's voices and the sounds of daily living. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, Preston and Lillian would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the bluffs. They would talk about their day, make plans for the future, and simply enjoy each other's company. Sometimes they did not talk at all, content to sit in comfortable silence, Preston's arm around Lillian's shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "You ever regret it?" Preston asked one evening in the summer of 1885. "Leaving Philadelphia, coming all the way out here to marry a stranger." Lillian turned to look at him, this man she loved more with each passing year. "Never," she said firmly, "not for a single moment. This life, this family, you are everything I did not know I was looking for. How could I regret finding it?" "I think about it sometimes," Preston admitted. "About how different things could have been. If your sister had not gotten sick, you would have arrived in February instead of August. We would have been married 6 months earlier. And we would have missed those months of getting to know each other first," Lillian pointed out. Of building a friendship before we built a marriage. Maybe the delay was a blessing in disguise. Preston considered this, then nodded slowly. Perhaps you are right. Those weeks before we married, learning about each other, they gave us a foundation. Many mail-order marriages do not have that. We were fortunate, Lillian agreed. In many ways. They were blessed with another son in 1886, whom they named Thomas after Preston's grandfather on his mother's side. He was a placid, easy baby content to lie in his cradle and watch the world with solemn eyes. Rose, meanwhile, proved to be the wildest of the children, always climbing things she should not, always getting into mischief. James tried to be responsible as the oldest, but at 4 years old, he was still more interested in following his father around the ranch than in watching his siblings. The ranch continued to prosper. Preston bought more land, expanding their holdings. He bred horses as well as cattle, and his stock became known throughout the region for quality. Lillian managed the household accounts and discovered she had a head for business, suggesting investments and improvements that Preston often implemented. In 1888, when James was 5 and Rose was 3 and Thomas nearly 2, Lillian gave birth to twin daughters. The birth was difficult, and for a few terrifying hours, Preston thought he might lose her. But Lillian was strong, stronger than anyone realized, and she came through the ordeal with 2 healthy baby girls, both with dark hair and their father's gray eyes. They named the twins Emily and Grace, and Preston declared that they were finished having children. 5 is enough, he said, looking pale and shaken as he held his newborn daughters. More than enough. I cannot go through watching you suffer like that again. But Lillian recovered quickly, and though the household was chaotic with 5 children under 6 years old, she managed with cheerful efficiency, aided by Mrs. Cooper and a young woman from town named Anne who came to help with the children. The years passed in a blur of growth and change. James grew tall and serious, showing an early aptitude for ranching. Rose remained wild and free-spirited, happiest when she was outside riding horses or climbing trees. Thomas was the gentle one, more interested in books and learning than in ranch work. The twins were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and inventing their own secret language. Through it all, Preston and Lillian's love deepened and grew. They had their arguments, as all married couples do, but they always worked through them, always came back to the fundamental respect and affection that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. In 1890, they celebrated their 8th wedding anniversary with a trip to Omaha, leaving the children in Mrs. Cooper's capable care for a week. It was the first time they had been alone together in years, and they reveled in the freedom, exploring the city, eating in restaurants, attending the theater. "This is lovely," Lillian said as they walked through the city park one afternoon. "But I miss the children. Is that terrible?" Preston laughed. "I miss them too. I keep expecting James to ask me a question about the horses, or Rose to come running up covered in mud, or one of the twins to demand a story. We have built a good life, have we not?" Lillian said, stopping to look up at him. "Despite everything, despite the delays and the uncertainties and the hardships, we have built something wonderful." "We have," Preston agreed. He took her hand, raising it to his lips. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. The waiting, the worrying, all of it, because it led me to you." "I arrived 6 months late," Lillian said softly, "but you told me that you waited every single day for me. That has always meant more to me than I think you realize." "You were worth waiting for," Preston said simply. "You will always be worth waiting for." They returned to the ranch renewed and refreshed, throwing themselves back into the chaos of family life with enthusiasm. The children greeted them with squeals of delight, all five of them talking at once about everything that had happened while they were gone. As the 1890s progressed, the ranch became one of the most successful in the region. Preston's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher spread, and people came from miles around to buy his horses and cattle. Lillian became known for her hospitality, always welcoming neighbors and strangers alike into their home, feeding them at her table, offering assistance when it was needed. The children grew and thrived. James, at 13, was already helping run the ranch, showing the same work ethic and integrity as his father. Rose, at 11, had finally channeled some of her wild energy into training horses, and she had a natural gift for it. Thomas, at 10, announced that he wanted to be a teacher, and Preston and Lillian supported this dream, even though it meant he might not stay on the ranch. The twins, at 8, were still inseparable but developing distinct personalities. Emily was the planner, the organizer, while Grace was the dreamer, the artist. In the spring of 1896, Martha visited again, bringing her husband and 2 children. She had married a shopkeeper in Philadelphia, and they had a comfortable life in the city. But as Martha looked around at the ranch, at Lillian's 5 healthy children and her obvious happiness with Preston, she shook her head in wonder. "I remember when you left Philadelphia," Martha said one evening as they sat on the porch. "You were so frightened, so uncertain, and when you arrived here 6 months late, I was sure everything would be ruined. But look at you now. Look at what you have built." "I had help," Lillian said, smiling at Preston, who was teaching the twins to rope fence posts. "I had a partner who believed in me, who was patient with me, who loved me even when I did not always love myself." "You chose well," Martha said, "or perhaps he chose well. Either way, you are both lucky." "We are," Lillian agreed. "Very, very lucky." That summer, tragedy struck when a fire broke out in town, destroying several buildings, including the general store. Preston and Lillian organized the ranch's resources to help the affected families, providing food, supplies, and temporary shelter. The community rallied together, and within months, the town had been rebuilt stronger than before. The incident reminded Lillian of how much their lives had become intertwined with this place, with these people. She was no longer a stranger from Philadelphia. She was a valued member of the community, a rancher's wife, a mother, a friend. She had put down roots so deep that she could not imagine them ever being torn up. As the century drew to a close, Preston and Lillian found themselves with more time alone as the older children became increasingly independent. James was 18 now, fully capable of running the ranch on his own. Rose was 16 and had already had several young men come calling, though she seemed more interested in horses than in romance. Thomas had gone to Denver to attend teachers' college, writing long letters home about his studies. The twins were 13, still close but developing their own interests and friendships. One evening in the fall of 1899, Preston and Lillian rode out together to their favorite spot overlooking the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. They dismounted and stood side by side, surveying the land they had built together. 17 years, Preston said. "Can you believe it has been 17 years since you stepped off that stage coach?" "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Lillian replied. "Other times it feels like a lifetime ago." "I was such a different person then, so young and naive." "You were brave," Preston corrected. "You traveled halfway across the country to marry a man you had never met. That takes courage." "I was desperate," Lillian said honestly. "I had no other options, but I am glad now for that desperation. It brought me here to you, to this life." Preston put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Do you remember what I said to you that first day at the lumber mill? "You said you waited every single day for me," Lillian recited. "I will never forget that. It was the moment I knew everything would be all right." "I would wait for you again," Preston said softly. "I would wait a lifetime if that was what it took." Lillian turned in his arms, looking up at the man she loved. At 47, he had silver in his dark hair and lines around his eyes, but he was still strong and vital, still the steady presence she had come to depend on. "You will not have to wait," she said. "I am right here and I always will be." They kissed as the sun set, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a family and a legacy together. The waiting was long over, but the love remained, constant and true. The new century dawned with celebration and hope. The children were all healthy and thriving, pursuing their own dreams while remaining close to the family. James took over more of the daily operations of the ranch, allowing Preston to slow down just a bit. Rose married a neighboring rancher's son in 1902, a young man who could match her in both horsemanship and spirit. Thomas became a teacher in Denver but visited regularly, bringing stories of city life that fascinated and amused his ranch-bred family. The twins were courted by half the young men in the county, but they took their time choosing, determined not to settle for anything less than what their parents had. In 1907, Preston and Lillian celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a large party at the ranch. The house was bursting with people. Their children and their children's children, neighbors and friends from miles around, all gathered to honor the couple who had become pillars of the community. As Preston stood to make a toast, he pulled Lillian to her feet beside him. "25 years ago," he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room, "I wrote to a matrimonial agency because I wanted a partner, someone to share my life and help build a future. What I got was so much more than I expected. I got Lillian." He turned to face her, his eyes soft with love. "She arrived 6 months late, and I spent every one of those days wondering if she would come at all. But when she finally stepped off that stagecoach, I knew the wait had been worth it. She was worth it, and every day since has only confirmed that truth." Lillian's eyes filled with tears as Preston continued. "She gave me children, a home, a love I did not know was possible. She turned this ranch from a house into a home, from a business into a legacy. She is my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. And I would wait for her all over again if I had to." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Lillian kissed Preston, not caring that everyone was watching, wanting the whole world to know how much she loved this man. "I was 6 months late," she said when the noise died down, "but Preston never gave up on me. He waited every single day, believing I would come. That faith, that loyalty, that love, it has been the foundation of our marriage. And I am grateful every day that I finally made it here, to Nebraska, to this ranch, to him." More applause, more cheers, and then the party continued late into the night with dancing and laughter and joy. Preston and Lillian danced together as they had on their wedding day, moving in perfect harmony. Two people who had become one through time and trials and unwavering devotion. As the years continued to pass, they grew old together gracefully. Their hair turned gray, their steps slowed, but their love never diminished. They watched their grandchildren grow, and eventually their great-grandchildren, the ranch passing from generation to generation, but always remaining in the family. On a warm summer evening in 1920, Preston and Lillian sat on the porch of the ranch house, now expanded and modernized but still fundamentally the same. They were both in their 70s now, their bodies showing the wear of hard years, but their minds were still sharp and their affection for each other undimmed. "We have had a good life," Preston said, taking Lillian's hand. "The best life," Lillian agreed. Better than I ever dreamed possible when I left Philadelphia all those years ago." "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had arrived on time?" Preston asked. "If you had not been delayed," Lillian considered this. "I think we still would have fallen in love," she said. "But perhaps not as deeply. Those weeks of getting to know each other before we married, they gave us something special. They gave us friendship as well as attraction." "True," Preston agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I am glad you were late." Lillian laughed. "That is the first time you have ever said that." "Well, I am," Preston insisted. "Because it gave me time to realize what I was getting. It gave me time to appreciate you. And when you finally arrived, I knew without a doubt that you were worth the wait." "And you were worth traveling across the country for," Lillian said softly. "Worth every hardship, every uncertainty, every fear. You gave me a home, a family, a love that has sustained me through everything." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the familiar landscape of their ranch. In the distance, they could hear the voices of their great-grandchildren playing, the next generation preparing to take over the legacy they had built. Preston raised Lillian's hand to his lips, kissing it with the same reverence he had shown on their wedding day. "I waited every single day for you," he said, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago. "And I would do it all again." "I know," Lillian whispered, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "And that is why I love you." They sat together until the stars came out, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life from patience and faith and love. The wait had been long, but the reward had been infinite. And as they finally rose to go inside, hand in hand as they had walked for nearly 40 years, they both knew with absolute certainty that every single day had been worth it. Their story became legend in Scottsbluff, told and retold through the generations. The mail-order bride who arrived 6 months late and the rancher who waited for her every single day became a symbol of true love and unwavering faith. And long after Preston and Lillian had passed on, their descendants would tell the story to their own children, keeping alive the memory of a love that had endured through time, trial, and the test of patience. The ranch remained in the family, prospering through the decades, a testament to what two people could build when they came together with commitment and love. And on quiet evenings, when the wind swept across the prairie and the sun set over the bluffs, it was said that you could still feel their presence there. Two souls forever intertwined, forever grateful for the wait that had brought them together and the love that had kept them that way until the very end.